Thank you very much, Secretary Vilsack. I have the opportunity now to do two things before we close. One is to thank so many people who helped us with this conference, and second is to summarize our day. So first, of course, we want to thank our speakers and moderators, and especially Secretary Vilsack, Ambassador Rice, Minister Kalibata, and our friend, always Administrator Shaw. We want to thank our lead sponsor, Abbott, our sponsors, DuPont, Monsanto, and the Good Growth Plan, the support from the next generation sponsors, Cargill, Land O'Lakes, and Novus International, and then we're always grateful for the generous support of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Thank you to our civil society partners, and also, of course, as was stated earlier this morning, to our principal author, Gerald Nelson, who presented this report that got so many accolades today. There are many Chicago Council staff who have done an incredible job helping us to put all of this together. And they, if they're here in the room, perhaps could stand. Well, starting with Mr. President, thank you very much, Ivo Dulder, for your leadership here. Marjorie Burdetsky, Matt Burdetsky, Cassandra Carter, Anna Edwards, Melissa Gunin, Melanie Hannon, Kimberly Hayes, Stephanie Hines, Louise Iverson, Megan Keefe, Sung Lee, Trin Liu, Elizabeth Lula, Elizabeth Marquardt, Matt McGuire, Lisa Moon, our leader, Rachel Murphy, Tria Raimundo, Natalie Schienemann, Sam Skinner, Kavita Sood, Laura Sousa, Tyler Strom, Sarah Warner, January Zell. Please join me to say thank you to all. Advancing food security in the face of climate change. The weather is changing. How do we ensure, we decided today or discussed today, that we have increased production, increased access to food, support for those most impacted, but at the same time, at worst, not contribute more to climate change, and at best, grow more but decrease impact on climate change. As two of the speakers in the two first panels, Mr. Riley and Mr. Masaniwa, said, it's not rocket science. Many people said it doesn't cost a lot more money, but we have to be smarter. It shouldn't be political with a big P or small p, and it can be accomplished by smarter policies, more partnerships, more private sector investments, continued and expanded government commitments. The first priority that Doug outlined this morning was the priority of having a continued and even stronger commitment by the U.S. government for food security. As Ambassador Rice pointed out, the Obama administration has made major efforts in this regard, and Raj Shah was kind enough to credit the Chicago Council for the intellectual underpinning of much of that work. In Congress, we know there has been progress, including in the Farm Bill, although sometimes it's two steps forward, one step back, as some of us know who had been working here on this project. But we know that ultimately what we need to do is to work with members of Congress to ensure that food security is in law. Raj talked about how we're hoping to start to create a new American ethic to lead on food security and ending hunger. We've always had an American ethic toward work to end hunger, but it's been through food aid. And now the shift is, let's shift this toward helping farmers become more productive themselves. Or if I could paraphrase an old Chinese saying and update it, teach a woman to fish, rather giving her a fish. This conference gave us more definition to why this was important, why there's many kinds of security, as was said, food security being one of them, and they're all interrelated, why this is a social good and a moral obligation. And two of our first two speakers, Michael Gerson and Bill Riley, as well as three speakers, Carolyn Miles, all highlighted the impact on the poor. And in fact, Michael Gerson said that climate change is magnified for poor people who did the least to create it and have the least resources to be able to handle it, and all said, especially women and children. We did more at this conference to define smallholder farmers, define the people that are most impacted, define farmers as business people, farmers as women and men. The ambassador used the pronoun she when she referred to African farmers, in fact. And we talked about the workers on farms, women, men, girls, and boys, and even the age of farmers, as Patrick O'Toole said. I think if I quote him correctly, the average age of farmers shouldn't be me. And we also talked about climate. My favorite quote was Judith Schwartz, I think, who said, we usually think about climate as the sky, but it's also the land. And we did indeed talk a lot about the land. When we talked about more research, and there was a lot of discussion about why we needed more research, probably most direct was from Minister Kalibata, who said we need more scientists on board. For instance, we see more diseases now that it's warming. But Lester Brown talked to us about water shortages becoming even a larger problem than available land, and there was a lot of discussion about the need for more research in this area. Syngenta told us they were going to have more production with less inputs, presumably including less water. And then we also learned about the Water Efficient Maize in Africa program, for which many people have very high hopes for its success. Ronnie Green told us that water is the new oil. Certainly is an area that needs more attention and more research, as was called for in the report. Food waste reduction, we talked about from a lot of different perspectives, how food waste also loses water, how climate change is exacerbated, how infrastructure is needed, how waste can be used to create energy. But the one disagreement that we had was on the value of cow manure. There definitely were different opinions. And when the report called for more and better data, we heard a lot of examples for that, more market data on a large and small scale, mobile solutions. We heard proposals from one of our presenters this morning, proposals like iHub, iCow, and about focusing more information on farmers, on women and men. And then we heard from our government representatives in the US about data.gov, about sharing data. And also, even when we talked about trade, we were reminded by the Undersecretary of USDA that trade is not just on the ocean, but it's also about cross-border. So data becomes important there too. And it also obviously is critical when we talk about weather and risk management. This was an amazingly rich conference. My 5 minutes do not do it justice. But if I were to summarize all together where I hope we all are, that we leave here with a renewed enthusiasm and even more positive outlook, that there are many, many potential solutions, that there are even more people dedicated to try to work together in order to put these solutions in place, that food security, even in climate change, is achievable in our lifetimes, no matter whether we're old farmers or new ones, young ones, and that working together, we can achieve much. Let us leave this conference today committed to doing that, committed to working with the United States government to further promote these ideas, to put them into law, and to work together on behalf of poor farmers in the developing world, to give them, those women and men, girls and boys, the basics that they need to be able to succeed on their own. Thank you. Good night.